warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're actually going to do something rather detailed. Let's look into it. So, yesterday, or the day before yesterday kind of got sick. We went in some details with the ayat. وَكَذَلِكَ نُصَرِّفُ الْآيَاتِ. Remember, we talked about nusarrif, and we said a couple meanings for nusarrif. By the way, I forgot to mention that the word musarrif there, it can be in a compound word for nusarrif. So we said nusarrif كذلك نصرف الآيات, and in such ways we would do tasrif. And we said tasrif can mean to bring in direction. Tasrif could also mean to dispense. Tasrif could also mean to channel. So we looked into we talked about nusarrif right there, and we talked about nusarriful ayat, and that they would say darasta. They would say that you had put in, of course, some dedication to study all this. It was basically something that you had reviewed and someone else taught you it. You had then taken these ideas or these words from a different faith, from a different scripture, etc. And then وَلِنُبَيِّنَهُ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. So وَلِنُبَيِّنَهُ, this lam right there is to basically let us know that in order to give this tasrif al-ayat, in order to let these ayat channel the right way, let these ayat basically process in your brain, and let these ayat direct you and bring about that direction, that لِنُبَيِّنَهُ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. It's to take the time to learn, to take the time to find the ilm within it. And this is extremely important, because in order for you to stay committed, you would have to take in the time to learn the religion, whether we're speaking about learning the faith itself, learning fiqh, learning tafsir, learning hadith, etc. All of that is basically part of al-ayat. That's part of learning the ayat. And that's why the following ayah says, اتَّبِعْ مَا أُوحِيَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ رَبِّكَ, and follow what was revealed onto you from your Lord Almighty. And we talked about the word from your Lord to give an indication that it was carrying within it, that the actual verses, that the revelation itself carries within it the different merciful words of guidance, in order to, one, maximize pleasure, but in a certain way that does not contradict the person's interests. And at the same time, it's maximizing pleasure, whether we're speaking about delayed pleasure in Jannah, or whether we're speaking about the pleasure in this dunya, that it would be within a balanced amount that does not contradict, and certainly that does not become the liberal way, or the other cultures, that the main key is to maximize pleasure. And to mean maximizing pleasure is to basically let pleasure be the goal. But Islam considers that no, your interest, your benefit, and certainly your akhirah is definitely the key to understanding how all of these are basically played out in a way to help you basically find the word ittabi'. The word ittabi' actually means to follow. So if you are following, okay, if you are following, that would simply mean it's leading you to a path. La ilaha illahu. What is that path? Well, that's the path to the Lord Almighty. There's no God worthy of worship but Allah. And وَأَعْرَضْ عَنِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. And أَعْرَضْ عَنِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, stay away, turn away from the disbelievers, because certainly they have their path and you have yours. وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا أَشْرَكُوا. If the Lord Almighty had willed, He would have actually made them all not have the free will to associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created them with a free will because that's what would basically relate to getting tested. They're being tested, so that's why he had given them the free will. If they were not tested, then he would take away their free will and they would basically have no free will and only one will, which is the will that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had perhaps ordered them or designed them to do. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we talked about there is al-mashi'a al-tashri'iyya and al-mashi'a al-kawniyya. We talked about two kinds of wills. There's the will that is the will that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in nature, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within your nature, that you have the free will to choose to go to the church or go to the masjid, go to a good place or go to a bad place. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that does not mean that He's accepting what choices you make. He gave you something in nature. You can choose to, I don't know, write Quran with your hand, or you can choose to write something else evil with your hand. At the end, this free will was in order for you to get tested. Yet وَلَا يَرْضَى لِعِبَادِهِ الْكُفْرِ. That's that legislating will. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never will that you would do whether shirk or whether sin. Okay, so we talked about that one. وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا أَشْرَكُوا وَمَا جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَفِيظًا. And that's basically to let us know that Sharia itself was in order to preserve you, to give you the preservation, to basically give you the direction as well. Because when you say al-wakil, al-wakil is giving us an indication that Quran, that the Prophet ﷺ was also a wakil on behalf. What is a wakil? A wakil is kind of like a power of attorney, kind of like a someone to guarantee something on your behalf or on his behalf or etc. So when you look at وَمَا أَنْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِوَكِيلٍ, you're not a wakil on the disbelievers, you're not a hafiz on the disbelievers, but does that by inference mean that he's a hafiz on the believers, or he's a wakil on the believers? The answer is yes and no. Let me explain it. So no, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, إِنَّكَ لَا تَدْرِي مَا أَحْدَثُوا بَعْدَكَ. You don't know what they had committed after you, even though he knew very well that the people that were coming to al-Hawd on Judgment Day, to that lake on Judgment Day, to drink from al-Kawthar, that they were Muslim. That he said, they're ashabi, they're my friends, they're companions, they're part of the Muslim nation. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, they're not going to be included because you don't know what they had done after becoming Muslim. So that's when the Prophet ﷺ just recognizes that he has to submit to the fact that he doesn't have the knowledge for al-ghaib. Now, when you look at وَمَا جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَفِيظًا, how is it that it is a yes, that he would also be the one to preserve us? Well, the sunnah, okay, not he himself, but the sunnah was in order to give us protection, meaning guidance, meaning justice, meaning stability, because the Quran itself is directing us to learn and follow the sunnah. So when you look at, was the Prophet ﷺ a hafiz for the believers? Well, if you mean by hafiz that the sharia itself or the sunnah itself was a way to guide, was a way to protect, was a way to direct, was a way, then the answer is yes. But if you mean hafiz, that by me mentioning بعرض النبي, or by me mentioning sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or doing kind of like what the Sufis would do and thinking that, the Prophet would protect us, then that would be shirk. Okay, I want you to keep that one in mind. Then that would be shirk, because the only hafiz and the only one that we would depend on for shifa, or for healing, or for protection, is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ does not give protection to you, let's say in, I don't know, in what you're going through, etc. It does not give you protection, but the sunnah itself can give you direction, can give you protection, can give you that, but not physical protection. That's only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Same thing. Can the Prophet ﷺ be al-wakil? Can we say, بحق النبي, by the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Allah, answer this dua for me? Or Ya Allah, bihaqq al-Nabi, and with what I believe in Muhammad ibn Abdullah. And this happens a lot with Sufis, especially Sufis. They do this a lot and think that it's a way of honoring the Prophet ﷺ. And certainly, I'll just say it this way, within the Muslim the Muslim discourse, okay? Within the Muslim discourse, the majority of the scholars, I would say, at least Ahl al-Hadith, they considered that saying the dua bihaqq al-Nabi, or du'as like that, and doing it as if the Prophet ﷺ was the medium between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's a form of shirk. The other scholars, like the Ash'ari or the Sufis, etc., which of course Sufis are generally Ash'ari in many ways, okay? They would have their evidence, not that the other ones don't have their evidence, but they would have, let's say, different evidences that they had depended on to say and prove that you can actually say that. Amongst these evidences were this hadith, were this ayah, وَمَا جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَفِيظًا, meaning to the disbelievers, and therefore to the believers, the inference is that he would be حَفِيظًا عَلَيْهِمْ. Okay, which is, Ahl Hadith, they would completely object to that. And they would say, well, no, you are misinterpreting what the inference is saying. But this isn't saying that the Prophet ﷺ is a hafidhan on the mu'mineen, but this is saying on Judgment Day, he would not be accountable. This isn't speaking about protection, but this is to mean that he would not be accountable and responsible for the choices that they had made, and that on Judgment Day, they would be basically in face to face with the Lord Almighty, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already decreed, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ, that the Lord Almighty does not forgive that one would associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but would forgive other sins to whom He wills. Ustaz Umayya, go ahead, dear.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi
Walaikum
wa barakatuh.
assalam.
In the Surah Al-An'am, we pass by two نصرف تصريف. In ayah 46, when it says انظر كيف نصرف الآيات ثم هم يصدفون. Is it the same meaning of وكذلك نصرف الآيات وليقولوا درست? Or
Right. So when, that's one thing, is that tasrif, if I were to go to the different ayat in the Quran where it comes to talking about a tasrif. Okay, the word sarafa can also be a compound word. Sarafa anhum, صرفنا عنهم, صرفنا عنهم. So when you look at صرف عن, that's a compound word, and صرف إلى, that's a compound word. So when you look at the compound word, then that's going to give me a different meaning. But كذلك نصرف الآيات, we had multiple ayat in the Quran, كذلك نصرف الآيات. Okay, so that's why I was giving the details of نصرف الآيات and what تصريف الآيات would look like in the different contexts, and that's why I said that the different meanings for it, in order for us to see that when we look at the words, that, okay, I'm giving you, let's say, the basis, but that's not the complete story. So for example, انظر كيف نصرف الآيات ثم هم يصدفون, in ayah 46 that you had read. Okay, كيف نصرف الآيات, at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let's go back to it, okay, because that's in the same surah. Hold on, let's just remember this is page 150, and we're talking about ayah 46. So let's go right there, okay. I'm going to go back. 46 is right there. Okay. Let's look into it. I'm just going to delete all these highlight stuff. Okay. And here we go. Oh, it doesn't want to delete it? Yes, it does. Okay, here we go. Okay, let's look at that ayah so you could all see it. Where was it? 46. This is it. Okay, here we go. قل أرأيتم من أخذ الله سمعكم وأبصاركم وختم على قلوبكم من إله غير الله يأتيكم به انظر كيف نصرف الآيات ثم هم يصطفون. Okay, let's look into it. So what does it say? Do you see if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes your hearing, your sight, and then stamped your heart, who is the other Lord that would bring this to you? And see how we would channel or how we would give details for the different verses, yet they would turn away from it. Okay, yasdifun is different than yusrafun. Okay, so let's look at that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, well, you see if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes away your hearing. Why your hearing? Because your hearing, as in the previous ayah, let's go back to it. According to those previous ayat that we had done last week, oh dear, why did I change the page? Okay. In last week, we said when we looked at the hearing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was right there telling us, where was it? Those ayat, that it was basically talking about, let's look at it. Where was it? Remember that ayah when we were talking about the hearing, and we talked about along with the hearing, we said that that's the key thing to hearing the ayat, and we went in details with hearing the ayat. Here we go. I think وَلِتَصْغَى, that's that key thing. وَلِتَصْغَى إِلَيْهِ أَفْئِدَةُ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ وَلِيَرْضَوْهُ وَلِيَقْتَرِفُوا مَا هُمْ مُقْتَرِفُونَ. So if you were to look at that ayah that you pointed out, it pretty much comes in with the same idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He takes away your hearing, takes away your seeing, why takes away your hearing, why did it say take away your ears? It said because it's sama, to what you see as an ear, that outer part of it, that's not the complete thing. The complete thing is actually the inner side. So if He takes away your ability to hear, just because you have an ear, that doesn't mean you're capable of hearing. We all know that. Okay. If He takes away your hearing, because that's the most important method to have you process understanding the Quran. And then the second method is seeing, which is the open book. So this is important because when you're looking at is-sama, to hear the Quran and hear the guidance, you can have scholars that are blind, but you cannot really have scholars that are deaf. They can have some knowledge, but not really scholars, because hearing is a key tool for processing ilm. If somebody had later in their life, they had hearing loss, it doesn't mean that they lost their ilm, because they had already processed it, they got the key to learning, etc. That's a different story. And if you if your eyesight was taken away, well, not eyesight, but if your seeing was taken away, and the Lord Almighty had stamped on your heart, why tell us that if you would stamp on their heart? Because السمع processes in الفؤاد, okay? البصر processes in the brain, and then therefore what's in both is basically going to be in al-qalb. What you see, the brain processing, that's basically one part of the story. That's not the complete story. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Undur kayfa nusarrifu al-ayat." That's the word that you wanted to ask about. See how these ayat are basically given to you. Why giving to you? So this tasrif right there, whether you want to say, number one, undur. Another is not necessarily just with your eyes, but another could also be with your insight. Okay? With your insight. So the ayah says, انظر كيف نصرف الآيات. ثم هم يصطفون. So at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically, one, given them the direction, two, given them the direction for channeling those ayah to help direct their sama, direct their hearing, and direct their saying to recognize the truth. Okay. Yet نصرف الآيات, meaning just say it. It's dispensed right there in the open book, right there for you to see and for you to witness. And it's also sent in revelation in the written book. Yet ثم هم يصدفون. ثم هم, then they would يصدفون. صا دا fa can mean one, to go away, to eschew, to صدفة could also mean to harden on a certain position. Okay, so there's no contradiction with that one. But let's say the other صرافة that are in the ayat. So I'm just going to go over. انظر كيف نصرف الآيات لعلهم يفقهون. Also in the same surah, basically, and that's in ayah 65. We're going to go to the same surah, ayah 65, and actually see the same word for انظر كيف نصرف الآيات لعلهم يفقهون. Okay. قل هو القادر على أن يبعث عليكم عذابا من فوقكم, and say he's the one that's capable of sending a torment from above you, or even from underneath and beneath your legs, or even cover you in different divisions and make you taste the torments of one another. See how we would channel, direct, dispense, in other words, how these ayat are basically surrounding you right there. لعلهم يفقهون, for perhaps that would motivate you to understanding basically what was revealed. So that's, I want you to look at the word لعلهم يفقهون, and the other one was لعلهم يعلمون, and the other one, if you were to look at each and every single one, that's in order to tell us that نصرف الآيات was always relating to لعلهم يفقهون, لعلهم يعلمون, and basically to let us know that in order to get into processing, channeling, and having these ayat, or these, whether the open verses, the written verses, meaning the revelation, or whether the open book, the only way to have that give you direction is really through one, fiqh, meaning understanding and not necessarily the science of Islamic jurisprudence, or whether it's لعلهم يعلمون, as in ayah 105, and it basically tells you, well, there's ilm, there's fiqh. In other words, you have to take in the time to learn those ayat in order for those ayat to basically give you that ilm, to give you that channeling, to give you that processing, to give you that direction. You would have to put in that ilm to help you find those, that. And that's the only way that you would be capable of letting that reach your fu'ad. Okay, let's see. In another ayah in Surah Al-A'raf, وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ وَالَّذِي خَبُثَ لَا يَخْرُجُ إِلَّا نَكِدًا كَذَلِكَ نُصَرِّفُ الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يَشْكُرُونَ. لِقَوْمٍ يَشْكُرُونَ. Rather different. Let's see. وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يخرج نباته بإذن ربه. So we're talking about plants right there. So this is a metaphorical ayah. In Surah Al-A'raf, ayah 58. Let's go to it, right? Surah Al-A'raf, ayah 58. Okay, here we go. Here's Surah Al-A'raf. Let's go to 58, right? It's not going to be far. Let's go right there. Actually, right there. وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يخرج نباته بإذن ربه وَالَّذِي خَبُثَ لَا يَخْرُجُ إِلَّا نَكِدًا. So you could say it's basically talking about, well, you would say in a city, and this is completely metaphorical, you would see in a city that the soil itself, whatever you plant in it, if the soil itself is not containing the minerals that are necessary to growing a plant that is healthy, all you would get is basically all those weeds that are not of healthy weeds, and then they end up basically affecting what type of plants you're growing. So what is that trying to tell us? That your heart and you basically create that fertile ground in then later when the Quran is planted in your heart. If the ground lacked the minerals that are necessary for the Quran to basically grow in your heart, if you had been investing in the wrong in making the wrong ground within your heart, whether it's through sin or whether it's through shirk, then certainly even when you hear the ayat, you're not gonna process it right. You're not processing it right. You're not processing all of that because you had put that seed in a soil that is not a healthy soil. The problem is not with the seed. The problem was with the soil that you yourself may had basically contaminated without you realizing. So when you say كذلك نصرف الآيات, in other words, the ayat themselves, they basically have a certain channel. They basically have a certain place that will cultivate all of that. They will basically process in a certain way, but you have to recognize. I want you to look at this one.
That's why tawbah is so important, subhanAllah.
Absolutely. When you look at لِقَوْمِ يَشْكُرُونَ, this is key. Right now, I sent you all this lecture, the podcast about that doctor, what was her name? Francisca something, but I really want you to listen to it because she had done an outstanding job. I was really, really fascinated by the great job and the way that she had mentioned, the Islamic psychology did an outstanding job. I had never heard anybody presenting Islamic psychology in that good way. Dr. Francisca, what was her name? Francisca, hold on. Let's see, it's a podcast of that Muslim thinking. I think you all got to watch it. Dr. Francisca Bucca al-Dacre. She's Italian, but did an outstanding job in explaining the Western psychology compared to the Islamic psychology or the Islamic tazkiyah, okay? And of course, you will have some people object to it and say, well, no, this is Sufi, etc. I'm sorry, whoever said everything in Sufism is wrong. You sometimes can see that some people, they just have these blocks of creating the Muslim community as if it's a sect, that's Salafi, that's Sufi, that's
because of lack of knowledge, right?
It's lack of knowledge. Who said
Yeah.
that Al-Ghazali, you don't want to say Al-Ghazali is one of the scholars of Islam. You don't want to say that Al-Balkhi, you don't want to say, there are great scholars of Islam. And it's quite sad that you would say some people are so rigid in their classification that, it's like, I need a certain name for it, or I need a certain, a sect for me to relate to. It's like, just relate to that this was a Muslim scholar and he was going back to Quran and going back to Sunnah and he was deriving something that is needed for making the Muslims become better. That's all I need you to know. That's it. Whether you use the name Sufi, you use the name Salafi, it does not mean the main difference. It's not the issue. Okay. Anyhow, so when you look at this one, كذلك نصرف الآيات لقوم يشكرون, when you look at, she was talking about psychology and that's her field, and talked about how within, of course, the modern psychology or the Western psychology, it's always coming in with the premise that whatever you go through today, that it is all really based on a trauma somewhere in the past. And then therefore, we're just in search, looking for things that happened in the past. And that's what's causing my slowdown, my weakness today. But Islam basically redirects our vision and says, no, you don't continue to look at the past, but you recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking you to say Alhamdulillah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking you to redirect your vision from looking at a trauma, from looking at the sorrows of the past, to letting you see the privileges that you have today. And that's the way to cultivate success. To get to success is to recognize the tools that you have, to recognize the privileges. It's redirecting your mindset from the mindset of being a victim to a mindset of a hero, a mindset of a leader. That's the difference. That's what Islam creates. And that's when you look at لِقَوْمٍ يَشْكُرُونَ, you wouldn't be capable of recognizing that knowledge unless you realized the privilege of the ilm. Remember, كذلك نصرف الآيات. We looked at كذلك نصرف الآيات, and we talked about لقوم يعلمون. We talked about لقوم يفقهون. We talked about, right now, we're right there, لقوم يشكرون. Now, this is extremely important since you wanted to bring it up. Let's go for another one. In Surah Al-A'raf, لقوم يشكرون. Let's see. In Surah Yusuf. Let's see. Go to Surah Yusuf. Hold on.
It looks like it looks like this نصرف ويصرف. It looks like pouring in the same container, same meaning as this for here in Surah Al-A'raf 58. نصرف الآيات كذلك نصرف. This is as if Allah said that like this we deal with the signs. For the believer, they will thank Allah, يشكرون. And for the one who said that the Prophet ﷺ took his wahi from the both Christian in Mecca Jabr and Yasar, نصرف الآيات وليقولوا درست. This signs like this sign, and same in Surah in 65 al-An'am, انظر كيف, as if pay attention, انظر, pay attention how we deal with these signs, right? Understood it?
Right. If you look at this one, for example, وَلَقَدْ هَمَّتْ بِهِ وَهَمَّ بِهَا لَوْلَا أَن رَأَى بُرْهَانَ رَبِّهِ. And within this ayah, basically the word لَوْلَا is to tell us that all of that was basically, it would have happened, that Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam would have had some lenience towards basically the king, the queen, basically, but she had those feelings and a very strong urge towards Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, but he would have had those strong urges, but لولا أن رأى برهان ربه, but he had seen the signs of his Lord Almighty, so he didn't have those urges. In other words, what controls the urge? What controls the urge is basically the burhan, is basically the evidence, is basically the signs, the direction. And that's why he said, كَذَلِكَ لِنَصْرِفَ عَنْهُ السُّوء. Look at that ayah. كَذَلِكَ لِنَصْرِفَ عَنْهُ السُّوء. So what is it, نَصْرِفَ عَنْهُ? Even though صَرَفَ, okay, صَرَفَ means, like we said, to channel, to process or dispense, or to give direction, etc. But نصرف عنه, okay, that's a compound word that actually means to keep away. Okay, now when you look at لنصرف عنه, that's to keep away, but how did, remember when وما أرسلناك عليهم حفيظا? So when you look at Sharia, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says لولا أن رأى برهان ربه. What protected him from that urge, which would have probably given him, of course, if he's going to be, this lover for the queen and the hidden lover, and he would do whatever she wants. I mean, he'll definitely get some kind of a privilege somehow to probably get away with a lot of different things because he's her secret lover. Okay, but he saw the signs of the Lord Almighty. And because he had seen the signs of the Lord Almighty, that's what gave him this channeling away, here's that word, channeling him away from the fitna, to channel him away from fitna actually means to channel him towards guidance, towards Allah, towards that direction that is towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How did that dispense into? Well, لِنَصْرِفَ عَنْهُ السُّوءَ وَالْفَحْشَاءَ. It was to keep him protected and to keep السوء والفحشاء. What is السوء والفحشاء? السوء والفحشاء, if they go together, that's basically to talk about zina, okay? Adultery, fornication, okay? But السوء itself basically means all sin. الفحشاء is usually to mean the aberration related to, let's call it lust, okay? إِنَّهُ مِنْ عِبَادِنَا الْمُخْلَصِينَ. He is part of the servants that are مُخْلَصِينَ, not مُخْلِصِينَ, but مُخْلَصِينَ. What's the difference? مُخْلَصِينَ is like a very high level of sincerity. Now, just keep that in mind. Higher level in his sincerity, and he was مُخْلَص. I want to look at this one. How do we do that tasrif? How do we do that redirection? You need to get one, ilm. You need to get fiqh. You need to be shakir. And you need to be mukhlas. That's basically, when you look at كَذَلِكَ نُصَرِّفُ الْآيَاتِ, you have to keep that one in mind. In order for this to be dispensing, processing in your heart, in your fu'ad, in your mind, in your behavior, in basically لِنَصْرِفَ عَنْهُ السُّوءَ وَالْفَحْشَاء, we would basically have to go back to those ayat, كَذَلِكَ نُصَرِّفُ الْآيَاتِ, and basically get to processing, channeling. In other words, just like in Surah Al-A'raf, it would tell you, well, the fertile soil, that's your responsibility. To keep your soil, metaphorically and figuratively, to mean your body, to mean your mind, to mean your heart, that's that soil. Your duty is to control that soil, which is your body, your mind, and your heart, to keep it free of contamination. And then when the seed of Quran and Sunnah, they come in, you will see that it's growing and processing within you beautifully. But your responsibility is to make sure that those grounds are containing the right healthy minerals. What minerals? We're not talking about zinc and iron and all of those things. We're talking about the minerals basically to grow in faith. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, remember Surah Al-Muddathir, يَا أَيُّهَا الْمُدَّثِّرْ قُمْ فَأَنذِرْ وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ وَالرُّجْزَ فَهْجُرْ. It's quite interesting. I never thought about it yesterday when Dr. Francisco was actually talking about hygiene, and that a lot of mental illnesses, you would see that they lack hygiene. They would come in and, they're dirty and completely living in when you're talking about schizophrenia, they would not want to touch water, and they would really have a very strong odor because of the lack of hygiene. Same thing, you talk about other illnesses. Hygiene is one of those symptoms, and it's not just a symptom for mental illness, but it could also be what may even channel towards mental illness. But it's quite interesting that, like I always say, when we speak about mental illness, okay, right now they would classify it as mental illness, but Islam basically separates between mental illness and amrad al-qulub, and consider that amrad al-qulub has their way of treatment, and amrad al-nufus, to meaning basically the mental, etc., that basically has its own path. But at the same time, we always need to sometimes connect these two together. So even part of the treatment is to make sure that the person is always, and wudu is always away from najasa, is always clean, whether in body, clothes, or place, that's basically to help them become better in their mental health. So part of mental treatment and part of spiritual treatment is basically hygiene, is basically tahara. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhal muddathir, qum fa'andir. The one that is all bundled up in your garment, you've got a mission, but there's no way that you can go up to the mission. There's no way that you can live up to the mission unless, well, Ya ayyuhal muddathir, qum fa'andir, rabbaka fakabbir. You start with your foundation, your Lord Almighty. You recognize His honor, rabbaka fakabbir. You consider your Lord Almighty as the greatest, your number one priority. ثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. Want you to clean your garment. Always remove all those contaminants away from your garment, your body, your clothes, etc. وَالرُّجْزَ فَهْجُرْ. And stay away from all those different contaminations, whether we're speaking about behavioral contamination / sin, or whether we're speaking about actual contaminations, physical contaminations, then you would have to purify yourself from all of that. فَهْجُرْ وَلَا تَمْنُنْ تَسْتَكْثِرْ. And then certain behaviors that you would not engage in certain behaviors just to increase in your interest, but you don't consider yourself as the center, but you consider your Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the center, and therefore you would bend to the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You would bend to the principle of the Lord Almighty and not let or think that the principles are going to bend to you. Okay, so when we look at this one, let's see, the sister was saying, hold on, you said the Birliwi sect in Pakistan. To be honest, I don't have all the details about them, so I can't really talk about that group. And she said, one of my ustaz said in Tazkiyah class, if you want to learn Tazkiyah, learn applied psychology. Well, I don't know. I can't, I didn't study applied psychology, so, I just have rough reading on that subject, so I cannot necessarily say that, yeah, I would agree or disagree, because I'm ignorant in that in that area, so I cannot endorse or even criticize that statement, because I am not a specialist within that field. So just one thing, okay? But I would say that I disagree with, maybe I can put it in the story. I was teaching at the University of Minnesota, giving a lecture there. And I had some students basically come to me and tell me that they are learning Hinduism to understand Tawheed. This is real. I'm not making this up. I am not making this up, okay? You're learning Hinduism to understand Tawheed. How is that so? How do you learn Hinduism why not go directly to Islam, study Tawheed there? Why go and study shirk and think that you can understand Tawheed through shirk? How is that? And that's what I worry about, is that sometimes they get into, let's say, applied psychology or what, just different fields, and then thinking that that's going to lead me to better understanding the religion, better understanding Islam. And I have a problem with that. So I would say, no, learn Islam, and we've got the resources. We don't necessarily need those external sources to learn Islam. Alhamdulillah, the resources in Islam are available, and let's stick to that. Let's learn the Islamic resources and fully process those. And then the experts, if they can learn probably maybe applied psychology, maybe biology, maybe neuroscience, maybe, I don't know what it is, all those different fields, and then we can probably embed some information that may help us in fiqh, may help us in tazkiyah, may help us in understanding, maybe understanding certain things in defending Islam, like in aqidah, etc. Well, that's a different story. We can benefit from other fields, but let's make Islam be the main ground. Okay,
جزاك الله خير for explaining about نصرف ونصرف. It was amazing. جزاك الله خيرا. May Allah make تصريف وساوس الشيطان عنا يا ربي. آمين.
Ameen, ya Rabbi, ameen. That's all right. I mean, I love it when people provoke me, okay? I love it when people provoke me because it takes me into a different world. It's like, okay, here,
Yeah,
here's somebody challenging my statement. I love it. Challenge me, and I don't mind at all. And since you challenged me, and you know what? That gave me the opportunity to go deeper in that.
It's not challenging. It's like you make us fly with you in the same sphere you are flying.
You don't believe it or not, I wish that I can continue even for hours and hours. Believe it or not, I had one time given a 9-hour lecture.
ما شاء الله.
9-hour lecture على نفس واحد.
ما شاء
I
الله.
would have continued, but I felt that it was too much on the audience. I think it was too much.
And to your house also.
You know, I enjoy it so much that I just feel like, I know how to swim. I learned how to swim at 6 years old. So the only thing that I can relate to learning and studying tafsir is when there's a certain time, especially morning, when you swim in the morning. If you're a good swimmer, okay, not somebody that's afraid of water, but if you're a good swimmer, there's a certain time in early morning, if you swim in the water would feel so soft, and you would swim underneath the water, and you just feel the water just go over your body. You're not swimming on top, so you're not letting the water hit you, but you're swimming and gliding underneath the water, and you're just gliding with a full, after taking a deep breath, and you're letting that water just basically go over your body and just gliding. That's how I feel
Allah.
when I'm doing tafsir. It's like I'm gliding with, when the water is all surrounding your body, you can't hear anymore, but the water surrounding all your body, you just feel the moisture penetrating all your pores, and you just feel that it's like getting into, like a tingling feeling with all those water particles penetrating your pores, and you're not hearing anything but the water
Allah.
trickling at the top, and you just feel it, and that's the same thing that I wish I'm able to dispense tasrif, doing that. I wish I can do this tasrif in tafsir and just let you feel that dispense, that direction, that guidance, that channeling, and just let get into this type of epiphany. It's just taking me into a different world. I wish I could do that, but and that's why you're like, you rest. But guess what? The thing is that my rest is in doing tafsir. That's the only time that I just feel so happy. I just get in so much, what is the word that I could use? Like nashwa. That's the word in Arabic.
Yes.
The word in Arabic, in nashwa, you just feel like, when you're so thirsty, and you just put in this cold water, and you just feel the water. You're like, I know exactly where that water is running through my, through my body. I know exactly where it's going because you could feel it.
لذة الشرب.
Exactly. There's that beauty. There's that taste that it's so hard to just not enjoy. And you just like, I'm enjoying it so bad. I don't want to give up. I don't want to end. And that's the thing, is that sometimes I have to end because I'm afraid, other people are swimming along, but they're trying to keep up, and they're probably drowning. And some don't want to drown. They're like, I'll get they'll sign out and just leave because they're afraid of drowning. And others, they're like, I'm swimming, but you know what? I'm not that much of a good swimmer. So please, swim at a slower pace so I won't drown. I'm trying to keep up. So I recognize that some of the swimmers that are joining us are still, at the beginning of their swimming skills. So I try as much as I can not to go too deep because I want to
Don't
make
worry,
sure.
we got floaties.
Exactly. I just want to make sure that they're capable of getting to the shore and still stay safe and not drown. So yeah.
May Allah give us same your line that we can scuba diving deeper and deeper with you, inshallah.
آمين يا ربي آمين. I actually wanted to go with this ayah. ولا تسبوا الذين يدعون من دون الله فيسبوا الله عدوا or عدوا in another قراءة بغير علم. كذلك زينا لكل أمة عملهم ثم إلى ربهم مرجعهم فينبئهم بما كانوا يعملون. This ayah, let's first give a fast translation. And do not say words of profanity in regards to those that would invoke or that would pray or worship other than the Lord Almighty, for that may provoke them to say words or inappropriate words or words of profanity against Allah in transgression or out of animosity without knowledge. That is how every nation, their actions had beautified, basically created a narrative to their thoughts. In other words, their actions. Remember when we said fertile, your body, your mind, that acts as the fertile ground for basically the seed of the Quran, etc. But that's the same thing. People's behaviors then act as the ground, how it may confuse, how it may redirect basically their mind, their body, their heart, etc. And certainly that will act as a fertile ground, and this fertile ground where they would say even the ugly things as beautiful. They'll create a narrative. So كذلك زينا لكل أمة عملهم.
Just like everything is upside down.
Right. Well, yes, but the A doesn't say upside down. It just says, let me talk about the word zina. The word zina really means something, to put in like.
No, I mean, I was just commenting on what you were saying.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
when you say zayyana means to beautify something. Okay? Zayyana, to beautify something. So when you are beautifying a certain thing, what are you doing? The wrong behavior, that's what the disbelievers are doing. The wrong behavior, they would give it a flashy, a beautified narrative to make it appealing. That's basically zina. Zina is to make something appealing, to make something appear in a way that is approachable, in a way that is attractive, etc. That's it. And certainly every single nation, they would have a way to make their shirk appealing, their kufr, their zina, their sin, they would make it appealing. So they would probably the shirk, you would see Hindus making all this art to make the shirk appealing. It looks beautiful. Hey, you also have a special dance for it. You could also smell the incense and the bahur, all of that right there to make shirk appealing. Same thing when you're talking about for perhaps behavior. Zina is called love is love, and certainly it's presented in Hollywood, in basically the cinema, as if it's a love story, as if it's a victim in the midst of all this opposition that's trying to take away a beautiful reunion or a beautiful union between these two people, which basically is outside of marriage. Okay, so it's basically زينا لكل أمة عملهم, whether it's, hey, alcohol is spiritual drinks, and of course, the the words even used, this is or giving you some form of feelings of what do they call that, what do they call that, those CBD stuff, anyhow, forget it, what do they call that, forgot it, anyhow. ثم إلى ربهم مرجعهم, and then their return is to the Lord Almighty, and He would فينبئهم, and then He would inform them of what they were doing. But here's one thing. There are actually a couple things that al-Qurtubi wanted to say in regards to this ayah. He said that there are 5 different issues in regards to this ayah. Number 1, he said, for the word, the ayat, وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ, he said that is basically forbidding us, and forbidding us from doing what? Hold on, let's write that right down. Okay, let's see. So وَلَا تَسُبُّوا, it's telling us do not. وَلَا تَسُبُّوا, this is nahi, forbidding you from doing something. لا تسبوا who? الذين يدعون من دون الله, those that would, the word يدعون can mean to يعبدون, can mean يدعون as well. يدعون to mean invoke, or يدعون can also mean يعبدون, to worship. Okay, just keep that in mind. Okay, يدعون in all the ayat can mean to worship and can also mean to make an invocation. What's the difference? العبادة is a ritual, doesn't necessarily request a specific thing, like a prayer, in the general understanding and the general definition of prayer. So that's يعبدون. Okay, and يدعون can mean يعبدون as well. And يدعون can mean something rather more specific, to mean to invoke, meaning request something, maybe request healing, maybe request, I don't know, a baby, or maybe request provision, all of that. That's basically also another form of dua. Okay, so dua or يدعون can mean العبادة يعبدون, and could also mean something specific, to mean make a dua. Okay. من دون الله, other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَيَسُبُّوا, so why? I know what you look at this one. It said, do not, what is the word المسب anyways? السباب is to say anything inappropriate about something. An insult. Anything that is inappropriate, or at least something that the other person feels that that's an insulting statement. Okay, anything. So whether you insult using words of profanity or not. Il-masabba in general is to somehow degrade, condescend, use words that, basic words or behavior that shows any let's say disregard to what? Well, here in this context, this is to show an insulting behavior or insulting statement, basically towards their gods. But it's not an actual God that we would believe in. Right. So let's wait until we understand why. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-Qurtubi said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbid the believers from insulting their gods, because He had known that if they were to insult their gods, that the disbelievers might repel away and in fact engage in further kufr, engage in further, being even more distant away from Islam. let's say, Ibn Abbas said, the people of Quraysh, they told Abu Talib, you either tell Muhammad and his companions, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to stop insulting our gods, or we would start insulting his God and say words and statements of basically statements of insult towards his God. That is Allah. So that's when this ayah was revealed. Let's look at right there. It said al-Muharrar al-Wajiz, basically Ibn Atiyah, and al-Tabari had also mentioned that one. Okay, let's see. So what is the inference that comes out of that? But before I do that, there was the sister, she basically showed me that she had bought the tafsir, okay? And I would like to show you a way where you don't have to buy the tafsir. Okay, here we go. Look at this one, altafsir.com, okay? You got this, altafsir.com, and well, in Arabic we would say at-tafsir, but you know, in English I need to read it to you. And then you would open this one. I know it opens up to you in English, but I'll show you exactly how you would get the page. You would get the page like this, okay? And here we go. We're going to get the tafsir right there, okay? You could even right there. In English, you only have this option. But if you go to Arabic, you see what I'm hitting right there? Let me even make the page bigger, okay? Okay, if you hit Arabic, here we go, click right there, and then it will give me a tafsir. Here we go, click on that, okay? And then it would open up basically this. I'm going to go right there, Surah Al'ana'am, and then I'm going to go, well, we are ayah 108. Here we go. I want to show you how you do this so you don't have to buy those tafsir. And then I'm going to go right there, hold on. I'm going to get to Tafsir al-Qurtubi. It's going to be there. Hold on. We don't have to find it. There we go. Oh, that's Razi. Let's go for Qurtubi. And then I'm going to do Ard. So here we go. I'm going to start. Give me the surah. Give me the page number. You're going to choose the tafsir that you want. And then you're going to hit Ard. Here we go. Give me Ard. There you go. So here we go. And then you're going to go on these three little dots right there. And you're going to, let's see if this allows me. Okay, oops, nope. Hold on, I'm gonna find it. Okay, and more tools. Let's see. That other screen, I'm gonna show it to you on Google Chrome. It's a lot easier. Hold on, because I'm used to everyone. I'm going to show you on Google Chrome because it's a lot easier for me. Okay, I'm going to do it right there. Okay, there we go. Oh dear. And what are we doing? I'm going to do this again. Okay, here we go. We're going to go موقع التفسير. Oh dear, come on. موقع التفسير. Okay, there we go. Opened up by itself. And then I'm going to click. I'm going to do this again. Okay, and then I'm going to basically say, give me the Arabi. Here it is, at-tafsir, opened up for me. So, and then I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, I want you to see this. Here we go. I'm going to choose the surah. I'm going to say Al-An'am, and then I'm going to choose the ayah 108. Okay, and then I'm going to choose the tafsir. I want al-Qurtubi. Here it is, al-Jami' al-Ahkam al-Quran, al-Qurtubi, and I'm going to say Ard. Okay, there we go. And then I'm going to hit these little three dudes right there, the little three dots, and I'm going to say translate that. I'm going to say English. There we go. Translate it for me in English. See? The translation is not the best, but I think it's a great. Let's see. There are 5 issues. First, the Almighty's statement, and do not insult those they invoke other than Allah, is a prohibition. Lest they insult Allah is the answer to the prohibition. So Allah the Almighty forbade the believers from insulting their idols because He knew that if they insulted them, the disbelievers would flee and increase in disbelief. Outstanding translation right there, 100% accuracy. Can't get anything better. Ibn Abbas said, the disbelievers of Quraysh said to Abu Talib, either you forbid Muhammad and his companions from insulting our gods and belittling them, or we will insult his gods and follow his path. Or insult his God and follow his path. No, this is right there a wrong translation up to here. Okay. But just this portion is wrong. But the rest is excellent. So this verse was revealed. Second, the scholar said, its ruling remains in effect for this nation in all circumstances. So whenever the disbeliever is in a position of safety and there is fear that he may insult Islam, the Prophet ﷺ, or Allah, or Almighty, then it is not permissible for a Muslim to insult their crosses, their religion, their churches, nor to engage in anything that may lead to that, because it is like being sent to disobedience. And the word those is used to refer to idols, which do not have reason according to the disbelievers, but disbelievers' belief regarding them. See, that's outstanding. That's outstanding translation right there. You got it right there, available to you. So I don't even have to buy any book of tafsir because it's available to you. But why am I, using this copy? I'm using this copy because I want to make sure that you see and you get used to the Arabic and you get used to the original. Okay. And I want you to see it right there. So I guess showing you the resources, giving you credibility, and giving at least the resources the credibility, and I want you to see it. But you could definitely use, like I said, you could right now get a very good translation, and that was actually very, very good.
Translation and have questions, they can bring them to class, right?
There you go. There you go. So you have it right there. So, yeah. All right, let's say. So we already just translated that, okay? He said the hukum, or the ruling of that, is basically always going to be there as long as basically the ummah is there. In other words, anytime a kafir is in power. How did he translate that? He said, what? What did he say? Did he say in power? What did he say? Its ruling remains in effect. Hold on. Let's see what he said. He said, where is it? It's the second. Its ruling remains in effect for this nation in all circumstances. Okay. So whenever the disbeliever is in a position of safety, I like that he used the word in a position of safety. I think that's even more proper than saying in power. That's actually great. And there is fear that he may insult Islam. Okay, so here's a question. What if they're not in fear? Let's say we're in a Muslim government and we're not afraid of considering that is illegal, or at least we'll be paying a fine. Does that make it permissible? No, it doesn't make it permissible. Even if the person was in a situation that he had a legal backup to protect him. Because at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling you that, even in private, you don't want them to get distanced away from listening to the words of Islam. Okay. And he said, even though for a Muslim, they would not consider that whether their crosses, their religion, their churches, or whatever it is, they don't consider them as necessary. Well, they don't consider them as a place that is containing any truth. But that doesn't mean you could transgress the limit and attack these people. At the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala held them accountable, and they would have to make the choice to believe. Okay, let's see. And he said, for this would be a sin. What would be a sin? Like, what would be a sin? Attacking their gods and all of that? Certainly, yes. Attacking their gods and attacking their faith and etc. And that is basically going to lead these people to be away from the religion. But here's one thing. And no, by the way, today is going to be just for today. For this week. thought it would be a good idea to get, kind of I don't know, what should I call it? Like a summer break or something. So just for a couple days, okay? Because I can't wean myself off tafsir. I just need that tafsir right there because I get really sick away from class. Okay. So I'm gonna have to, just give you some time off because we had been doing tafsir.
Saturday.
What?
What about Saturday?
Well, yeah, we're just gonna tomorrow, just like a week off, and then wait, tomorrow we have a class, Noodle? Of worships tomorrow?
Wait, what day are we?
We are on Thursday.
Tomorrow is Friday for us,
Usually,
and then the next day. Oh, maybe we should do it Sunday.
Hold on. I'll explain this later, okay? Let me just get to
Okay.
this.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So what the scholars derived from that ayah and other ayat is something called sadd al-dhara'a. Let me explain sadd al-dhara'a to you, okay? I'm just going to give you the other English side of it. I hope I have it. Hold on, let me see. Oh, I don't. Okay. That's all right. So what is sadd al-dhara'a? Oh, yes, I do. Right there. Oh, good job, Aisha. Hold on, let me split the page for you so you could actually see it. Okay, we're going to say split the window. There you go. Excellent. So I'm going to give you the English portion of it. Here we go. Okay, so what is sadd al-dhara'a? Sadd al-dhara'a, there's something called qawa'id fiqhiyya. What is that? It's one of the branches of studying fiqh. Islamic jurisprudence, one of the branches of studying fiqh is studying something called qawa'id fiqhiyya. Let me write that down, okay? قواعد فقهية. So what do قواعد فقهية and what does it mean? So the word قاعدة actually means maxim, and fiqh means legal maxims. So what does that mean? It's basically combining a number of different rulings in putting these different legal maxims to help us think of ways that would combine a number of different rulings in a certain legal maxim that would make it easy for us to combine all this in. And one of that is sadd al-dhara'a. What does that mean? So sadd al-dhara'a means blocking the means. What means? Well, blocking the means of evil. And certainly as a legal maxim, you're talking about something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not only in that day, so in general, is it supposed to be okay to swear, to use words and inappropriate words about their gods, to say, well, it's so stupid to worship this and that, okay? For example, okay, you were saying it's so stupid to worship this and that. This is so, whatever, using these kind of words, okay? Well, in general, certainly you could say that. But if somebody is of that faith and you use these statements that are for that person insulting, that might actually provoke the other person to use similar insulting statements against Islam. In other words, if you want tolerance, you also have to give tolerance as well. So this ayah that we were just doing was making it clear, let's go back to that ayah, making it clear that the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not want us to insult their gods was in order to avoid them insulting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's basically letting us know that rulings in Islam are basically also dependent on a reasoning, no causality. It's like, okay, there's a cause and effect. I want you to put that within perspective, and therefore, when we speak about rulings in Islam, not all, but the legal maxim in Islam, the general reason behind different rulings in Islam is basically to block the means of evil. So the reason why Allah,
Example.
okay, the main reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid, let's say, looking at inappropriate scenes or looking at haram things is because that's going to excite you in a way, and that's probably going to lead you to committing zina. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid that you would speak ill and probably gossip at somebody because you're breaking the society's ties and the community's ties, and you're creating more and more lack of empathy or perhaps lack of consideration, or breaking the ties of probably trust between people. In other words, that would lead to more people getting into one, mentally ill, feeling lonely, feeling hurt, and probably other people getting abused, and etc. The list goes on. So Islam tells you, well, I don't want you to engage in gossip. I don't want you to engage in looking at haram, because that will lead you to a major sin. So minor sins all have some channel and some way that traces all the way to a major sin. So Islam would tell us that the minor sins, since they lead to major sins based on this ayah and based on other ayat, then therefore you would see the Malikis are the most ones that are famous for using this statement. And of course, it's not just the Malikis, but you also have the Hanbali. You also have, in fact, it is in all madhahib, but maybe perhaps the terminology itself is let's say, more used by the madhab Maliki and Hanbali than perhaps the madhab Hanafi. But that does not mean that a madhab Hanafi doesn't regard that legal maxim. As of course, they regard that legal maxim. In fact, I would say even in a stronger way than madhab Maliki. Anyhow, so what is the evidence that this legal maxim is at all as to be something to be taken in consideration? Number one, وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ, which is the ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbid us basically from. And the ayah that we had done told us, do not insult those they invoke besides other than Allah, lest they insult Allah in enmity without knowledge. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited cursing their idols, prohibited cursing their ways of worship, in order to avoid basically the outcome that may result in perhaps insulting Muslims, probably insulting Allah, probably insulting Islam, maybe all of that. Well, don't insult and engage in those ways. And that's one thing, is that there has to be fiqh. We're going to get to that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also said, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَقُولُوا رَاعِنَا وَقُولُوا انظُرْنَا. Do not say the word رَاعِنَا and say the word unzurna. And the word ra'ina was linguistically permissible, yet it was banned because the Jews twisted it into a slur. It was therefore forbidden to close the door to abuse and basically others misusing those halal ways. Let's see in Surah Al-Isra, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, do not approach zina, fornication, or adultery, as because the command is not to just avoid zina, but to stay away from anything that leads to it. And that's basically showing what it means to block the means that lead to sin, that lead to evil in general. Let's see, from the Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ basically forbade buying and selling after the second call, basically on Friday, after the second call to prayer, because it distracts the person from engaging in their salah. And the same thing, the Prophet ﷺ had forbid being alone with a non-mahram woman, because it can actually lead to any form of immorality and falling in a wrong, or even ruining their own reputation. Let's see, he warned against excessive cursing, shaitan. لا تسبوا الشيطان وتعوذوا بالله من شره. Why? Because you don't want to exaggerate the power of shaitan. Don't exaggerate the power of shaitan. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling you, I want you to seek refuge in Allah from shaitan, and don't exaggerate the shaitan's power. So in other words, making sure that we would redirect the way that we would even word things. Okay, the other thing, of course, there's a rational consideration that Sharia came to bring and secure benefits and prevent harm. Okay, and therefore, it basically had regarded that sadd al-dhara'a basically is one of those maqasid al-sharia. Okay, now when you look at all of that, okay, that takes me back to this. We won't take long.
You said maqasis, what?
Maqasid al-sharia. The maqasid al-sharia, they're also legal maxims. The DNAIM, remember that one?
Yes.
Okay, so those are maqasid al-sharia.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I got it.
All right, let's see. But here's one thing. And he said, in this ayah, there is somewhat, of course, a sign that it's basically telling us that it is obligatory to consider and rule by sadd al-dhara'a. To rule by sadd al-dhara'a. But here's one thing. When you say ruling by sadd al-dhara'a, okay, the question is, to what level and how far can we actually get into sadd al-dhara'a? How far should we consider that? And I want you to look at this one. He said, فيه دليل على أن المحق قد يكف عن حق له إذا أدى إلى ضرر يكون في الدين. يا سلام. What does that mean? He said, and in it, there's evidence. Maybe we should actually look at this one, the translation, so you can get used to it. Okay, let's say, he said, this verse also contains a true, okay, no, he said, here we go. He said, it also indicates that the one who is in a right, in right, basically, in other words, they have the legal right, may refrain from fulfilling his right if it leads to harm that may affect the religion. An example of this meaning is what was narrated from Umar ibn al-Khattab, who said, do not make a final judgment between relatives for fear of severing ties. This is a very dangerous statement right there. Hold on, what does it say in Arabic? We need to look at the Arabic part of it, right? Let's see the Arabic part of it, and what does it say? لا تبت الحكم بين ذوي القربات مخافة القطيعة. Now, what does that mean? So not to make like a legal statement, or like, what does that mean? When you say لا تبت, like, what does that mean? If we're talking about, I mean, this person, she's probably suing her father for something, or that person is suing his brother, or etc. So we're not going to make a final statement, like a final judgment. Why shouldn't we? I mean, he was the one that was abused. Why shouldn't we make a final judgment? And Umar ibn al-Khattab, with his fiqh, know what he was saying? He was basically telling us, don't make those final judgments. In other words, your duty as a judge is to take in consideration the situation and the circumstances that you're dealing with. So if, let's say, you get a husband and a wife basically coming in and fighting over some, let's just say, trivial issue. It's not a big deal, okay? And therefore, you come in. Your duty is to bring about reconciliation and not necessarily come in to put that manhood's masculinity down and say, look at you, man, that's not what it means to be a man, etc., and all of that, and put his masculinity down in front of the woman. And at the same time, it also does not mean that you would make the woman be a doormat. It just means you have to have wisdom. You have to have wisdom in how you would bring about the reconciliation between them. Not every case that you would get that you would necessarily have to say, well, I'm going to say the truth. And you know what, husband, you're at fault in here. And how dare you do that? And you, lady, you are a victim here, and etc. And therefore, you know what, I'm going to give you a support, and I want you to seek divorce and nothing but divorce. And you know what, there's no way that you are going to be mistreated. This person is a narcissist. And then what are you going to do? You know, and this happens a lot. This happens a lot when, you know, people that are not, I would say, trained, I would say, still beginners, and they would rush and say, you know what? Yeah, we're supposed to be ending this and making a final judgment. No, that's not what you want to do. Sometimes, you know, sometimes you just got to learn when it's a family relationship here, when it's a dispute between a brother and a sister and a sister, or whatever, you know, family dispute, you don't want to rush in making a judgment, but try to rush in making a reconciliation. That's the thing. Making a reconciliation should be your first priority, and not making a judgment, because a judgment may contain within it, let's say, the inference that yes, you are an abuser and you are a victim, and then perhaps breaking the ties. So can we bring about a reconciliation where maybe the brother that we already know is an abuser, we already know that he was, you know, this narcissist person, etc., but we definitely don't want to break these ties. Can we get this narcissist person basically on ground and basically at least apologize, or at least say a good word or something like that? Can we use different words to bring about that relationship than using statements of division? That's the key thing. So a well-trained, wise person, whenever it's a family relationship, we would have to use something else. And you know what? It's quite interesting, I must admit. You know, I was at one point, I was always watching Judge Judy, and I find it quite interesting to see that it many times I could just put on that hijab on her and say, girl, you've been reading from Fiqh Maliki. The way that she would sometimes, especially if it's a mother, especially if it's a family relationship, you know, she would take in consideration that there's a certain level of respect and honor that that person should have had, and that the son, the daughter, etc., that they had put in so much effort to make you who you are today, and that you're concerned that, yeah, you know, this one day she kicked me out of the house, or whatever it is, you know, and then basically disregarding all the effort that the mother had put in. You know, so many times I could just put on the hijab on her and just say, lady, you're basically a Muslim judge right there. And anyhow, but you know, that's one thing, is that many times we would think that everything about the court system is kufr, which is not always necessarily true. I mean, I'm not judging it based on Judge Judy, okay? But I'm generally saying that not everything in the court system is necessarily kufr. But in same thing, when many times we would get people coming over and say, you know, let's say a wife and a husband are in dispute, or maybe relatives are in dispute, that they would expect that, yeah, I want you to give me that final statement and actually say that they were wrong, that they abused me, etc. And sometimes it's like, that's not what I will be doing at that moment, because my job is to bring about reconciliation and not necessarily a division. And this is extremely important because Umar ibn al-Khattab right there, لا تبت الحكم بين ذوي القرابات أو القرابات مخافة القطيعة. And he said right there, Ibn al-Arabi, if he definitely had the right, then he would have the right to take it. I mean, there's no question. Okay. Let's say he had the right to take his inheritance, but then this older brother is insisting that I'm not going to give it to you because you're, I don't know, a cruel, mean, whatever, all these different statements that he would one day, you did this, and therefore I would have the right to say, I'm going to punish you for it and take all the money. Yeah, that's so easy to create such a narrative. He said, even if it is permissible to delay, at least, let's say, delay making the final statement. There are certain situations that the judge basically has to say there's no reconciliation here, but the reconciliation is going to be after you give people their rights back. In some situations of reconciliation is to basically support and empower the abuser against the victim. So sometimes it requires that we would lay those, let's say, those borders and say, I'm sorry, but you had really transgressed the limit. And I'm not going to give you a religious empowerment or a religious labeling or a religious backup to let you think that, there has to be hikmah. Because if you're just going to, water this down, sometimes water this down and let's just make a reconciliation, then in that situation, for the person that abused is going to be like, oh, okay, good. That way I won't have to pay anything. And we could just say, I'll just say I'm sorry and still get away with all the money that I had taken. That's all it needed, basically just an I'm sorry. Oh, wow, that was so easy. Sure, I'll say, I'm sorry, I can text it to you. I can make you a good, beautiful birthday cake and with a big sorry on it. And if you want, I'll put you a cherry on top, but at least I'll get at least the $50,000. Oh, seriously? No, there's some hikmah that must be basically included to understand all of that and make sure that we're not giving that support to the abusers, but at the same time, there has to be some hikmah. So not always do we rush. If let's say a daughter is complaining of her mother or complaining of her father or whatever it is, we would just rush, you know what? Yeah, you're a victim, you're abused. And it's like, wait a minute. لا تبتوا الحكم بين ذوي القرابات مخافة القطيعة. Why مخافة القطيعة? القطيعة is to create a division within the family. Go ahead, Numi.
Yeah, is it tabuttu? It means that say the last decision for not
Yes,
losing bond between
البت في الحكم. It's to make the final decision.
Yeah. Jazakallah khair.
Okay. Okay. So although this is,
So let's say there's like a brother or sister who's fighting, and you try to, to get them to, yani,
to stand both sides.
No, they want to put somebody in the middle, and they either side they don't want to, you know what I mean?
right, I understand what you're saying. Noura, in general, there has to be hikmah. There has to be wisdom. What is wisdom? Wisdom is avoiding the bigger harm. And what is the bigger harm? The bigger harm is, for example, you said a sister and a brother. The bigger harm is basically to have them in qati'ah. Probably they haven't talked to each other probably in 5 years, 6 years, 7 years.
Yeah.
Qati'ah.
Mm-hmm.
That's qati'ah. You haven't been talking to each other for that long. That's qat'ir rahim. Yeah, but she did this and he did that. And yeah, she's got her narrative and he's got his narrative. And then the whole thing is basically getting into, this type of a division where it's separated both. She needs her brother and he needs his sister.
Yeah.
And we have to figure this out. Even if you couldn't figure it out, sometimes كسب القلوب أولى من كسب المواقف. Winning the heart is more important than winning the argument. Because you may have, for example, You may have maybe, this brother, okay?
Mm-hmm.
One day you guys got into, some argument and heated argument. He probably somehow, said a bad word and you got so angry. How dare you tell me that? And etc. And he didn't even apologize. Guess what happens? You not having your brother basically be there at those other moments, maybe coming in for your wedding, maybe come in for a moment during Eid, or maybe just stay, whenever we get into, let's say, a relationship, that brings in a higher possibility of us forgetting about the friction. And whenever we go away, we forget about each other. And then that basically expands the area of division. Let me give you an example. Maybe myself, you and your husband, okay? You and your husband, you get into some argument. And then if he's going to be going into a hotel and you're basically at home, that's going to expand the division. But if he was in the house, you're more likely to bump into each other. She'll basically go to the room and probably, I don't know, somehow he'll probably feel that the urge to be next to her and etc. And then what does that do? That basically brings the companionship back again. Okay.
So if you had like a brother and a sister who weren't talking and you somehow got put in the middle, you're saying to invite them both together, or that's
you wanna see before you make this like a blind reunion. You want to make sure that that the hearts are ready before you would get into that, because guess what's going to happen if you make this a blind reunion? There is a possibility that they will not trust you again, and
yeah.
then you just expanded the area of division. So you just have to be smart in how we would
And winning their hearts so they'll take the advice.
exactly to
Okay.
winning and doing all of that. This is extremely important. Let's see right there. And I got you a couple statements
Jazakallah.
in regards to this. This is not a hadith, by the way. This is an athar. Remember, it was Umar ibn al-Khattab saying that. And Imam Malik, basically, it was mentioned in his al-Mudawwana. Al-Mudawwana al-Kubra, a couple books, and it's considered like, well, there are different riwayat for it. But anyhow, he said, al-Qadi, if he used to consider, that is Imam Malik, that if al-Qadi feared that if his rule was going to create a division between the relatives in perhaps a very strong animosity, that he would not rule and he would guide them to a reconciliation. So what does that look like? So let's say we get a brother and a sister coming over, and of course Imam Malik, let's say he's a judge or this qadi, and he's like, here's this dispute right there. But he looked into the case, and even though he recognized that there's somebody that didn't have the right to do something, but then he felt that there was room so that there would be a sulh. What is a sulh? There would be a different department, and this department, similar to like marriage therapy, there would be family therapy. There would be the family therapists, and those family therapists would basically be experts and bring about reconciliation between the people to try to sort this out. Okay, so that's basically what al-Qurtubi was referring to, that in the end, this is, although not a hadith, but in general, it's basically the wisdom in fiqh, and it's basically part of the adab of making the court system. The court system, we would usually think of it as giving me a final statement and a final judgment in any dispute. But in Islam, before you would say, okay, I'm just going to make a final statement, sometimes it's not an issue of who is to be convicted. but can we make this from a trial of conviction to a trial of reconciliation? Can we figure out different ways to bring about the bond? Or probably even, here's the thing. When you are in a trial and you make it as a trial, well, this person is raising the issue and that person's raising the issue, and person A is basically getting out all these different evidences to support that, hey, this person is mean, bad, this person is abusive, this person did this, and they'll get out every single dirty thing that they could ever remember about person A. And person B wants to do the same. And instead of making the case basically as one specific case, then it becomes a whole case of multiple cases. To each side is trying to discredit the other side. Is trying to discredit the other side, and that therefore they would basically be not only discussing one particular side, but they are then literally making a battle. So in situations like this in Islam, it's not always a court system that is separated from other systems. The other system is to have a group or a body of experts in family reunion, marriage therapy, family therapy, etc., to basically help find different ways of bringing the family together rather than feeling that I have to judge. And I want to say one thing, is that a lot of the therapists, I had seen many, the children might actually go, let's say a child and other person might go, and I would say maybe perhaps 75% of the cases, they basically come in as a trauma, not from a stranger, but from a relative. Just keep that in mind. So if you have this client coming in, basically, right now, you would have many coming in, childhood trauma. My brother, he was beating me up and he was telling me this and this. He was calling me names, four-eyed, whatever it is, fatso, all these different things, okay? And then that results in a trauma of being bullied, etc. It was usually my older brother, my older sister was a bully. My father, he wanted structure. I wouldn't listen, but I just remember him, I don't know, spanking me. I don't know, holding a chair and just throwing it at me or whatever it is. Okay, all these things always will be there. Okay, that's why you would have, probably even 75% is probably even a very I would say a humble number, but I would really bet it's even bigger than that would come in basically seeking therapy from a childhood trauma, which is right now, of course, being proselytized as, yeah, you are right now going through all these nightmares or going through all these different situations. And here's what many therapists would do. Okay, many therapists would enforce the narrative that they are saying, or this person is saying, which may be true. I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, but that's the premise that they would stand on. They would stand on the premise that by me validating what they were saying, that's basically a way to gain their trust in us. And then I would validate what they are saying. That way they can trust me. And then that way I would basically get into making them then get the treatment and all of that. And what I would say is that, unfortunately, sorry, therapists, but I barely heard anybody, barely, and I will say it again and again and again, I barely heard anybody getting complete treatment from this broken system of psychology. I would say these people that are going through the system basically start with this diagnosis of PTSD or whatever it is, and then they end up from one therapist to another, one therapist to another of this talk therapy, etc. And then they end up being what? Then they end up basically getting more and more validation from therapist 1, therapist 2, therapist 3, that they are basically going through an early childhood trauma, and that's the result of what they're going through, blah, 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 all of that. And then all they would get is more and more validation, and then they end up really not getting the treatment. And that's why I very much love that Dr. Francisca that I was telling you about, that she was emphasizing that in Islam, it's redirecting your vision from looking at the trauma to telling you, well, no, wait a minute, it's not talking the talk, but it's walking a certain walk of discipline, of sabr, of hilm, of looking beyond the pain to looking towards a gain in al-akhir. That's the key thing. It's redirecting the way we relate with the people around us, and that we would relate based on principle and not based on a certain event here and there, but because we're trying to go up to a higher level in our Islam. We're trying to build a leader. We're trying to build a person that lives up to achieving a higher standard in what they can be, rather than live a victim of in trying to get validation that I am weak and therefore I have the right to be weak, because hey, look, even an expert is telling me that I have a valid reason. This is really dangerous, because what we're seeing, I'm not saying no one's getting treatment from therapists. That's not what I'm saying, but I barely see anybody basically finishing treatment. It's always, yes, you've got to follow up. There's no way that we can keep going. When is this going to end? That means you're not giving treatment. That means you're just really just putting a band-aid. But Islam tells you, no, we need treatment. And the treatment is with discipline. The treatment is redirecting your vision. The treatment is basically considered that you recognize that عند الله تجتمع الخصوم. You recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that's going to make a final judgment. Even if you didn't get it in the dunya, you don't stay within the mindset that that's it. This person had done such and such to me, etc. And that's basically the end of it. No, you would consider that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give you your rights. So your faith in Allah is going to make you a stronger person. So inshallah, we will take a week off. How about that, Nura? Just a week off and just have everyone basically take a rest. Let's see. Khasatullah said, I'm confused. I'm unsure when we should prioritize reconciliation and when it's appropriate to seek judgment. Okay, fair enough. If it's family, seeking reconciliation is the priority. Okay? Yet, if let's say that this situation is leading to more and more harm, and basically the perpetrator, even if it's a relative, that reconciliation is allowing them to further attack this person, then in that situation, you would want a judge to basically bring about a final statement and say, listen, you are not going to have a religious, let's say, a religious body give you any validation to what you're doing, and basically tell you that you are a perpetrator and we are seeing what you're doing. And if they have the measurement to stop, they have the power to to basically enforce perhaps a certain law or a certain punishment, then definitely do that. But if not, definitely always seeking reconciliation is first. So she was telling me about the Parlevis. So I know that about the Parlevi. What you had written about when they were, founded and all of that, the strong emphasis on Mawlid and Sufi influence. I know that piece of it, but I'm really hesitant to judge whether the Deobandis or Pahlavis, because I don't really know it at first hand. So I'm really hesitant to, I would say, judge a certain group over another group, because I did make a video, but then Noura deleted it upon my request. Okay. It's not Noura's fault. Okay. Which is where the Sufis and the Ikhwan had went right and wrong. But I'll just say one statement in that video that I think is important. Learn the ilm from Salafi. Learn the adab from Sufi. Learn the activism from Ikhwan. And based on that, okay, I want you to just see all the different groups. If you have Sufis, you're definitely going to see that they have the best adab. If you see Salafi, you're really going to be mesmerized with the ilm and the consideration for ilm. If you see Ikhwan, you will love the activism that they prioritize. And it's not those only groups, but I could those are the main ones at least. So I don't hold the position to somehow see Salafis as strict and extreme, or see Sufis as innovators, or see Ikhwan as betrayer, as the ones to basically be the ones to betray. I would not see it that way.
I saw a really good video. That Sheikh Dido, the
No.
Mauritanian.
Oh, Dedu, not Dido.
I'm
Dedu.
sorry. I saw a very good video on this exact subject, and it just kind of like, I don't know, it just like summed up everything in
Right.
in like
Right.
5 minutes or something.
Right. Right. What I would say is that it's extremely important to just remember, okay? Extremely important. Just remember that every certain group basically had some contribution. Some they focused on tazkiyah, and we should not disregard the great contribution that tazkiyah is. Certainly, if there's bid'ah, just take away the bid'ah. But when you see, for example, one group that just wants to paint everything about Sufis that it's just nothing but bid'ah, and then everything about Salafi that's nothing but rigid and extreme, I'm sorry, but that's not necessarily all true. I know there are different Salafis, definitely take it from me. Al-Madkhali put an X on them. That's a different story, okay? Madkhali put an X on them without even thinking that point, okay? But all the different the different Salafis, you could really learn a lot from those groups. You could learn a lot from Al-Ikhwan. I mean, they had contributed so much within the Ummah.
And Yasser Qadi, he also said, if
Well,
there, well,
Yasser
I'm just saying, like, if there is a group that's attacking another group, like, that's totally going against what we're supposed to be doing as ummah, right?
Well, with all my respect to Yasser al-Qadi, I think he's really waging a war on Salafi, maybe because of past trauma being in Saudi Arabia, okay?
Oh, okay. I haven't seen recent stuff, but
That's
yeah.
okay. That's okay.
Okay.
I don't want to wage a war on any. I don't want to wage a war not on
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like we should be trying to be united as a ummah.
Right. In theory, so much, it's so easy to say that, but I'll tell you one thing is that Sufis, if you look at the Ash'ara, they're really waging a war on Salafi, and the Salafi are really waging a war on Sufi.
Yeah.
They're really at each other's throats. So they'll really do, it's quite sad. If we did not have
we just
secular
have to go
governments,
back
they would
to
hold on. If we did not
Jazakallah.
have secular governments, أقسم بالله العظيم, they would be killing each other. They would be killing each other.
Yeah.
أقسم بالله, they would be killing each other because, and you could hear their words like, if only I could have my hands around a Salafi, I would basically drink their blood and suck their blood.
But we have to see they're missing the real.
Hold on, Noura. I mean,
Subhanallah.
I'm just telling you what's out there. Same thing when you look at the same thing with Hanafi. With the same thing when you're talking about Muhammad Abdul Wahhab. They were in Tarikh Najd. They were right there saying that, hey, before we would go into any city, we would hear if they were doing the adhan according to the Sunnah way, which basically is their strict version of what basically looks like the Sunnah way, meaning if they're basically doing it not based on the Sufi version, but and the Sufi version was the Dawla al-Uthmaniyya, basically the Ottoman Empire, that if they weren't doing it based on their version, that they would just invade the city and kill the men, women, and children. This is real. This isn't something that's
and people are wondering why we're in the situation we're in.
Noura, we have a lot to really learn from our history. Just to tell you, we have a lot to learn, because I'm telling you, if with this kind of rhetoric, with this kind of blind way of teaching to be in opposition in that way, and not bring in and say, no, love the Sufi for their adab and their commitment on dhikr, and love the Salafi for their commitment on ilm, and love the Ikhwan for their commitment on activism. And that's how you bring it together. If we revive this statement, and we revive to learn that some Sahaba were committed to jihad, others were committed to ilm, others were committed to activism. Each one was committed to, and others, they were, I'm not going to engage in any of this, just like when you have Abu Dhar al-Ghifari. I'm not going to get into any of this. I'm going to go to al-Rabada, and I'm going to be all the way far away from everything. Hey, some people, that's their mindset. You just have to recognize that. But Allah
in the end, we're all going to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Right, yes.
And be on our own. Subhanallah.
Yes, the recording is still on. And yeah, I don't mind saying what I said. I had professors that were Salafi, and I had professors that were Sufi, and I had professors that were Ikhwan. And I'm proud, and I must say I've learned a lot from each and every single one.
Yeah, I'm asking because if you want to discuss something about the days or the